The racist bodyguard protected a black pianist on tour. But when he heard the music, in the sweltering summer of 1962, the world of classical music was about to witness an unprecedented tour that would challenge not only the limits of artistic expression, but also the deeply ingrained racial prejudices of a divided nation. At the center of this storm stood Marcus Johnson, a 35-year-old virtuoso pianist whose ebony fingers could coax melodies from ivory keys that seemed to defy the laws of physics and emotion alike. Born in Harlem to a seamstress mother and a father who worked the docks, Marcus had shown an otherworldly talent for the piano from the moment his tiny hands first touched the keys of an old upright at his local church. His gift was undeniable, and through a combination of hard work, luck, and the generosity of a few key patrons, Marcus had risen through the ranks of the classical music world, becoming one of the most sought-after performers of his generation. Despite his success, Marcus was acutely aware of the barriers that still existed for a black man in America, even one of his stature. He had faced discrimination at every turn, from being refused service at restaurants to being forced to use separate entrances at the very venues where he was the headline act. Yet, Marcus refused to let the poison of racism taint the purity of his music or dampen his resolve to share his gift with the world. As Marcus prepared for his most ambitious tour yet, a cross-country journey that would take him from the progressive havens of New York and San Francisco to the heart of the segregated South, he knew he would need more than just his talent to see him through. He would need protection, a guide, and someone who could navigate the treacherous waters of a country still grappling with its identity. Enter Frank Sullivan, a 40-year-old ex-Marine with a square jaw, steely blue eyes, and a worldview as rigid as his military posture. Frank had been hired by Marcus's management team to serve as both driver and bodyguard for the duration of the tour. A product of his time and upbringing in a small Midwestern town, Frank harbored deep-seated prejudices against black people, viewing them through a lens of stereotypes and misconceptions. As Marcus and Frank prepared to embark on their journey, neither man could have predicted how this tour would challenge their preconceptions, test their character, and ultimately forge an unlikely bond that would transcend the color lines dividing their nation. The tour began in New York City, a familiar and relatively safe environment for Marcus. The first few performances went off without a hitch, with standing ovations and glowing reviews following each recital. Frank, true to his professional demeanor, kept his distance and performed his duties with cold efficiency, speaking to Marcus only when necessary and avoiding any personal interaction. It wasn't until their third stop, a mid-sized city in Pennsylvania, that the true nature of their journey began to reveal itself. As they pulled up to the hotel where they were supposed to stay, Frank confidently strode into the lobby to check in, while Marcus waited in the car, knowing from experience that his presence might complicate matters. Minutes ticked by, and Frank didn't return. Growing concerned, Marcus decided to investigate. As he entered the lobby, he immediately sensed the tension in the air. Frank was engaged in a heated argument with the hotel manager, his face flushed with anger. "What do you mean you won't honor the reservation?" Frank growled, his fists clenching at his sides. The manager, a thin man with a receding hairline, nervously adjusted his tie. "I'm sorry, sir, but we have a policy. We don't accommodate certain types of guests." Marcus felt a familiar ache in his chest, a mixture of anger, hurt, and resignation. He had faced this situation countless times before, but it never got easier. Frank, however, seemed genuinely shocked. "This is ridiculous. Do you know who this man is? He's Marcus Johnson, for Christ's sake. He's performing at your city's concert hall tomorrow night." The manager remained unmoved. "I'm aware of who he is, sir, but our policy stands. Perhaps you can find accommodation elsewhere." It was at this moment that Marcus decided to intervene. He approached the desk, his presence immediately causing a hush to fall over the lobby. "Frank," he said quietly, placing a hand on the agitated man's shoulder, "it's all right. We'll find somewhere else." Frank turned to Marcus, his eyes wide with disbelief. "No, it's not all right. This is discrimination," Marcus finished for him, his voice calm but firm. "And unfortunately, it's something I'm all too familiar with." The tension in the lobby was palpable as other guests began to take notice of the confrontation. Some looked away in embarrassment, while others watched with a mix of curiosity and barely concealed hostility. Frank, still seething, looked ready to argue further, but Marcus gently steered him towards the exit. "Come on, we should go before this escalates." As they walked back to the car, Frank's anger seemed to shift from the hotel manager to Marcus himself. "Why didn't you fight back?" he demanded. "You just let them treat you like that?" Marcus sighed, feeling the weight of years of similar confrontations. "Fighting every battle would leave me too exhausted to play, Frank. Sometimes, for my own sanity, I have to choose which hills to die on." This response only seemed to frustrate Frank more. "That's not right," he muttered, more to himself than to Marcus. As they drove through the city looking for alternative accommodation, the atmosphere in the car was charged with unspoken tension. Frank's worldview had been shaken, and he found himself grappling with conflicting emotions. On one hand, he felt a surge of protective anger on behalf of Marcus, a feeling that surprised and unsettled him. On the other, he was forced to confront his own prejudices and the uncomfortable realization that he might not be so different from the hotel manager. For Marcus, the incident was a stark reminder of the challenges that lay ahead. He had hoped that his fame and talent might shield him from the worst of the discrimination, but it was clear that even his renown as a musician couldn't overcome deeply ingrained racial biases. As they finally found a small, family-run motel on the outskirts of town that was willing to accommodate them, both men retreated to their respective rooms, lost in thought. The incident at the hotel had set the tone for the tour, highlighting the complex dynamics they would have to navigate, not just in their interactions with others, but with each other as well. Little did they know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would test their resolve, challenge their beliefs, and ultimately change both their lives forever. As the tour progressed, moving deeper into the heartland of America, the incidents of discrimination became more frequent and more overt. Each performance was a triumph of artistry, with Marcus's music touching the souls of those who came to listen. But the journey between venues was fraught with tension and unpleasant surprises. It was after a particularly grueling day, filled with turned-away service at restaurants and hostile glares from passers-by, that a revelation occurred that would alter the course of Frank and Marcus's relationship. They had stopped for the night at a small roadside motel, the only place for miles that would accept Marcus as a guest. As they settled into their cramped, musty-smelling rooms, Frank heard a soft melody drifting through the thin walls. Curious, he stepped outside and followed the sound to Marcus's room. The door was slightly ajar, and through the crack, Frank could see Marcus seated at a battered, old, upright piano that had seen better days. But the music that flowed from his fingers was nothing short of miraculous. It was a piece Frank had never heard before, a haunting melody that seemed to capture all the pain, frustration, and unwavering hope that Marcus carried with him. As he listened transfixed, Frank felt something shift inside him. For the first time, he saw Marcus not as a black man, not as a famous musician, but as a fellow human being pouring his soul into his art. The raw emotion in the music broke through the barriers of prejudice that Frank had built around his heart. Without thinking, Frank pushed the door open wider. Marcus, lost in his playing, didn't notice at first. When he finally looked up and saw Frank standing there, tears glistening in the ex-Marine's eyes, he stopped abruptly. "I'm sorry," Frank said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I didn't mean to intrude. I've never heard anything like it." Marcus studied Frank for a moment, seeing something new in the man's expression. "It's a piece I've been working on," he explained. "It doesn't have a name yet." Frank hesitated, then asked, "What's it about?" Marcus's fingers ghosted over the keys as he considered the question. "It's about this journey, about the beauty and the pain, the triumphs and the setbacks. It's about hoping for change while facing the reality of what is." In that moment, Frank realized that he had grossly underestimated Marcus. He had seen him as a talented musician, yes, but had failed to recognize the depth of his character, the strength it took to face daily indignities with grace, and the power of his art to express what words could not. "I think I'm starting to understand," Frank said softly. Marcus nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Understanding is the first step, Frank. It's more than most are willing to take. As Frank returned to his room that night, he found himself grappling with a profound sense of shame for his past attitudes and a newfound respect for Marcus. He realized that this tour was educating him in ways he had never expected, challenging his long-held beliefs and opening his eyes to realities he had previously chosen to ignore. This revelation marked a turning point in their journey, setting the stage for a gradual but significant transformation in their relationship and in Frank's worldview. The revelation in the motel room had a profound impact on Frank, stirring emotions and questions he had long suppressed. As they continued their journey, he found himself paying closer attention to the way Marcus was treated, noticing the subtle and not-so-subtle forms of discrimination that he had previously overlooked or dismissed. One evening, as they drove through a small town in Ohio, Frank made a decision that would have far-reaching consequences for both of them. They had been on the road for hours, and both men were tired and hungry. Frank spotted a diner that looked promising and pulled over. "Wait here," he told Marcus, as he had done countless times before. "I'll go check if they'll serve us." But this time, as he reached for the door handle, he hesitated. He turned to Marcus, a determined look in his eyes. "No," he said firmly. "We're going in together." Marcus raised an eyebrow, surprised by the sudden change. "Frank, you know that's likely to cause trouble." "Maybe it's time we caused some trouble," Frank replied, his jaw set. "I'm tired of pretending this is okay. You're Marcus Johnson, for God's sake. If they won't serve you, they don't deserve our business." Marcus studied Frank for a long moment, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. Finally, he nodded. "All right, Frank, let's do this." As they entered the diner side by side, the cheerful chatter inside died down to a tense silence. The waitress behind the counter froze, her eyes darting between the two men and the other patrons. Frank could feel the weight of hostile stares on his back as he led Marcus to a booth. The waitress approached cautiously, her hands trembling slightly as she held her notepad. "I'm sorry," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "but we don't." "Don't what?" Frank interrupted, his voice carrying through the silent diner. "Don't serve paying customers? Don't respect world-renowned musicians? Or is it that you don't serve Americans who've done nothing wrong except be born with a different skin color?" The waitress flinched at Frank's words, looking desperately towards the kitchen. A burly man, presumably the owner, emerged, his face flushed with anger. "You need to leave," he growled, pointing at Marcus. "We don't want any trouble here." Frank stood up, drawing himself to his full height. "The only ones making trouble here are you and your backwards policies. This man is my friend and a respected artist. If you can't see past the color of his skin, that's your loss." The tension in the diner was palpable. Some patrons shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others nodded in agreement with the owner. Marcus remained seated, his expression calm, but his eyes alert, ready for whatever might happen next. It was at this moment that an elderly woman at a nearby table spoke up. "For heaven's sake, Harold," she addressed the owner, "let them eat. I remember when your daddy wouldn't serve Catholics in this place. Times change, and it's high time we changed with them." Her words seemed to break the spell. The owner, still red-faced but now looking more embarrassed than angry, grudgingly nodded to the waitress. "Take their order," he muttered before retreating to the kitchen. As the waitress timidly approached their table again, Frank sat down, his heart pounding. He looked at Marcus, expecting to see gratitude or relief. Instead, he saw a complex mix of emotions. Appreciation, yes, but also concern and a hint of sadness. "Thank you, Frank," Marcus said quietly as the waitress took their orders. "But you need to understand something. What you just did, it was brave, and I appreciate it more than you know. But it also put us both in danger. These confrontations, they don't always end peacefully." Frank nodded slowly, the adrenaline of the moment fading and the reality of the situation sinking in. He realized that his impulsive decision, while well-intentioned, could have had severe consequences. "I'm sorry," he said. "I just couldn't stand by and watch it happen again. It's not right." Marcus reached across the table and briefly squeezed Frank's arm. "No, it's not right, and it won't change unless people like you stand up." But we have to be smart about it. This tour, my music, it's about changing hearts and minds, not just forcing confrontations. As they ate their meal in a diner that was slowly returning to its normal atmosphere, Frank reflected on Marcus's words. He had taken a step today, made a stand. But he realized that this journey was about more than just grand gestures. It was about the daily choices, the small acts of defiance and education that could, over time, affect real change. The incident at the diner marked a significant shift in Frank's approach to their tour. He became more proactive in ensuring Marcus's comfort and safety, but also more strategic in how he confronted discrimination. He began to understand that change was a slow, often uncomfortable process, and that Marcus's approach of persistence, dignity, and using his art to bridge divides was perhaps more powerful than any confrontation could be. As Frank and Marcus continued their journey, navigating the complex landscape of 1960s America, a secondary plot began to unfold. This subplot centered around Evelyn Carter, a young journalist for a small but respected African-American newspaper based in Chicago. Evelyn had caught wind of Marcus Johnson's groundbreaking tour and saw in it a story that needed to be told. She convinced her editor to let her follow the tour, documenting not just the performances, but the challenges and triumphs that Marcus faced as he brought his music to venues across the country. Frank was initially wary of Evelyn's presence, viewing her as a potential complication to his job of keeping Marcus safe. However, Marcus welcomed her, seeing the value in having their experiences chronicled for a wider audience. Evelyn's first encounter with the duo came after a performance in Indiana. As she approached them for an interview, she was struck by the obvious tension between Marcus and Frank, as well as the subtle ways in which Frank seemed to be wrestling with his own prejudices. "Mr. Johnson," Evelyn began, notebook in hand, "your performance tonight was breathtaking. But I'm more interested in what happens when you step off the stage. Can you tell me about the challenges you faced on this tour?" Marcus glanced at Frank before responding. "The challenges are numerous, Miss Carter, but so are the rewards. Every person who leaves one of my concerts with a new perspective, every barrier that's broken down, that's what makes this journey worthwhile." As Evelyn continued her interview, Frank found himself drawn into the conversation. He was surprised by the insightful nature of her questions and the way she seemed to capture the nuances of their experiences. Over the next few performances, Evelyn became a constant presence, observing the dynamics between Marcus and Frank, documenting the reactions of various communities to Marcus's presence, and slowly gaining the trust of both men. One evening, after a particularly tense encounter at a gas station where the attendant had refused to serve them, Evelyn approached Frank while Marcus was resting. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, her voice low and serious, "I've been watching you. You're not just a bodyguard, are you? There's more to your story." Frank shifted uncomfortably under Evelyn's perceptive gaze. "I'm just doing my job, Miss Carter." "No," Evelyn pressed. "You're changing. I can see it. You started this tour as one man and you're becoming someone else entirely." Her words hit Frank like a thunderbolt. He hadn't realized how visible his internal struggle had been. "It's complicated," he admitted. Evelyn nodded, her eyes softening. "Change always is. But it's a story worth telling, Mr. Sullivan. Your journey might be just as important as Mr. Johnson's." This conversation marked a turning point in the secondary plot. Evelyn's story began to evolve, focusing not just on Marcus's groundbreaking tour, but on the transformation of Frank Sullivan, a man confronting his own prejudices and growing in ways he never expected. As the tour progressed, Evelyn's presence served as a catalyst for deeper conversations between Marcus and Frank. Her questions forced both men to articulate thoughts and feelings they had been grappling with silently. Meanwhile, Evelyn faced her own challenges. As a black woman journalist in the 1960s, she encountered skepticism and hostility from many of the people she tried to interview. Yet, she persevered, driven by her belief in the importance of the story she was telling. Her articles, published in installments, began to gain traction. They painted a vivid picture of Marcus's musical genius, the harsh realities of racism in America, and the unexpected journey of a white ex-Marine whose worldview was being fundamentally challenged. As the secondary plot developed, it became clear that Evelyn's documentation of the tour was not just reporting. It was becoming a part of the change itself. Her articles were opening eyes, sparking conversations, and in some small way, contributing to the slow but steady shift in public opinion. This subplot added depth to the overall narrative, providing an external perspective on Marcus and Frank's journey and highlighting the broader impact of their tour on American society. It also set the stage for future developments, as Evelyn's growing involvement would soon play a crucial role in the unfolding drama of the main story. As the tour progressed deeper into the southern states, the relationship between Marcus and Frank continued to evolve in complex and unexpected ways. The shared experiences of discrimination and hostility, coupled with the triumphs of Marcus's performances, forged a bond between the two men that transcended their initial roles of musician and bodyguard. One particularly memorable evening, after a performance in a small Tennessee town, Marcus and Frank found themselves sitting on the porch of their motel, sharing a bottle of whiskey. The night was warm, filled with the sound of cicadas and distant thunder, promising a summer storm. "You know, Frank," Marcus said, breaking a comfortable silence, "when we started this tour, I never thought I'd be sitting here sharing a drink with you." Frank chuckled, a sound that had become more frequent in recent weeks. "Believe me, I'm just as surprised." He took a sip of whiskey, his face growing serious. "I owe you an apology, Marcus. The way I thought about you, about all black folks, when we started this trip, it wasn't right." Marcus studied Frank for a moment before responding. "You don't owe me an apology, Frank. You owe it to yourself. Changing your mind, opening your heart, that's not about me. It's about you becoming a better version of yourself." Frank nodded slowly, letting the words sink in. "I've been thinking a lot about my dad," he admitted. He was a racist, plain and simple. Raised me to be the same. I always thought I was different from him because I didn't use slurs, didn't join any hate groups. But now I see that not being actively hateful isn't the same as not being racist. "That's a powerful realization," Marcus said softly. "What brought you to it?" Frank gestured broadly, encompassing their surroundings. "All of this. Watching you face discrimination every day with more dignity than I've ever possessed. Seeing the way your music touches people, regardless of their color. And," he added with a wry smile, "having my ass handed to me in arguments by you and that journalist, Evelyn." Marcus laughed, a rich, warm sound that seemed to lighten the night air. "Evelyn does have a way of cutting to the heart of things, doesn't she?" As if on cue, they heard footsteps approaching. Evelyn appeared, notebook in hand as always. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said, sensing the intimate mood. "Not at all," Marcus replied, gesturing for her to join them. "We were just reflecting on the journey so far." Evelyn sat down, her eyes bright with curiosity. "And what have you concluded?" Frank and Marcus exchanged a look, years of shared experiences passing between them in an instant. "That it's been harder than we ever imagined," Frank began. "And more rewarding than we could have hoped," Marcus finished. Evelyn nodded, jotting down notes. "You two have come a long way from that first day in New York. Frank, I remember how you could barely look Marcus in the eye. And now," Frank said, raising his glass in a toast, "I'm proud to call him my friend." The simple statement hung in the air, its significance not lost on any of them. Marcus raised his own glass, touching it to Frank's with a soft clink. "Likewise, my friend, likewise." As the night wore on, their conversation deepened. They discussed the challenges they'd faced, the small victories they'd won, and their hopes for the remainder of the tour. Frank opened up about his struggles to overcome a lifetime of ingrained prejudice, while Marcus shared the weight of being a symbol as well as a musician. Evelyn listened and questioned, her presence both that of a chronicler and a friend. Her articles had been gaining traction, bringing national attention to their tour and the larger issues it represented. As the first drops of rain began to fall, signaling the arrival of the promised storm, the three of them sat in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The relationship between Marcus and Frank had grown into something neither man had anticipated. A friendship forged in adversity, strengthened by mutual respect, and deepened by shared purpose. This evolving relationship would be tested in the days to come, as they faced their greatest challenges yet. But for now, in the warm Tennessee night, with the rain beginning to fall in earnest, they were no longer a black musician and his white bodyguard. They were simply two men, united in their journey toward understanding and change. The tour had been building towards a crescendo, each performance and each mile traveled adding to the tension and anticipation. But nothing could have prepared Marcus, Frank, or Evelyn for the events that unfolded in Birmingham, Alabama. Birmingham in 1962 was a powder keg of racial tension, the very epicenter of the civil rights struggle. As news of Marcus Johnson's impending performance spread, so did the controversy. Local officials tried to cancel the concert, citing security concerns. When that failed due to ironclad contracts and the threat of legal action, opposition took a more sinister turn. The day of the concert dawned with an atmosphere of palpable tension. Frank had doubled down on security measures, his military training kicking into high gear as he assessed potential threats. Marcus, despite the pressure, remained focused on his music, spending the morning practicing in his hotel room. Evelyn, meanwhile, was in her element, darting around the city to capture the mood. She interviewed local civil rights leaders, documented the growing crowds outside the concert hall, both supporters and protesters, and kept a keen eye on the police presence, which seemed ominously heavy. As evening approached and the time for the concert drew near, the situation outside the venue deteriorated rapidly. A large group of protesters had gathered, their angry shouts audible even backstage where Marcus was preparing. Frank paced nervously, checking and rechecking his security plans. "Maybe we should cancel," he suggested, his face etched with worry. "It's not worth the risk." Marcus looked up from the piano, his eyes steely with determination. "No, Frank, we've come too far to back down now. The music must be played." As Marcus took the stage, the atmosphere in the concert hall was electric. The audience, a mix of black and white faces, held its collective breath as his fingers touched the keys. And then, as the first notes of Beethoven's Ode to Joy filled the air, something remarkable happened. The music seemed to transcend the racial divide, touching something universal in every listener. But outside, the situation was spiraling out of control. The protesters, inflamed by segregationist agitators, had begun to riot. The sound of breaking glass and police sirens penetrated the concert hall, creating a surreal counterpoint to Marcus's playing. Midway through the performance, a brick came crashing through one of the hall's windows, shattering the magical atmosphere. Panic began to spread through the audience. In that moment, Marcus made a decision that would define the entire tour. Instead of stopping or fleeing the stage, he seamlessly transitioned into a soul-stirring rendition of "We Shall Overcome," the anthem of the civil rights movement. The effect was immediate and profound. The audience, black and white alike, began to join in, their voices rising in harmony with Marcus's playing. The music spilled out of the broken windows, reaching the ears of the rioters outside. Frank, who had rushed to Marcus's side at the first sign of trouble, stood transfixed. He watched as the power of music began to quell the violence, the angry shouts outside gradually giving way to the sound of hundreds of voices united in song. Evelyn, who had been outside documenting the riot, made her way back into the concert hall just in time to witness this transformative moment. Tears streaming down her face, she raised her camera to capture what she knew was a pivotal moment in their journey and in the larger struggle for civil rights. As the last notes faded away, the concert hall erupted in a standing ovation that seemed to shake the very foundations of Birmingham. Marcus stood, his face shining with sweat and emotion, and took a bow that was as much a gesture of defiance as it was of gratitude. In that moment, all three of them, Marcus, Frank, and Evelyn, knew that everything had changed. The tour, their relationships, and their understanding of music's power to bridge divides would never be the same. In the aftermath of the Birmingham concert, Marcus, Frank, and Evelyn found themselves thrust into the national spotlight. The dramatic events of that night, captured vividly in Evelyn's articles and photographs, had catapulted their tour from a musical journey to a lightning rod in the ongoing civil rights struggle. The days following the concert were a whirlwind of activity. Civil rights leaders reached out to Marcus, eager to align themselves with what was being hailed as a powerful moment of musical protest. At the same time, threats poured in from segregationists and white supremacist groups, outraged by what they saw as a direct challenge to the status quo. Frank, feeling the weight of his responsibility more than ever, insisted on revamping their security measures. "We can't take any chances," he argued, his face lined with worry. Birmingham was too close a call. Marcus, however, was riding a wave of inspiration and determination. "We can't let fear dictate our actions," he countered. "The music is more important now than ever." Evelyn, caught between documenting the story and becoming a part of it, tried to mediate. "Maybe there's a middle ground," she suggested, "a way to continue the tour safely while still making a statement." It was in this charged atmosphere that they attempted to resolve the central conflict that had been brewing since the start of the tour. How to balance Marcus's artistic mission with the very real dangers they faced. The opportunity for resolution came in an unexpected form. Governor George Wallace, the infamous segregationist leader of Alabama, publicly denounced Marcus's performance and demanded that he apologize for inciting unrest. The governor's statement, broadcast widely across the nation, presented a crucial moment of decision. Marcus's management team, concerned about the financial and personal risks, urged him to issue a conciliatory statement and potentially cut the tour short. Frank, torn between his duty to protect Marcus and his growing understanding of the importance of their mission, remained uncharacteristically silent, leaving the decision entirely in Marcus's hands. It was Evelyn who proposed a daring plan. "What if," she began, her eyes shining with the thrill of a journalist on the verge of a big story, "instead of apologizing, you challenge Governor Wallace to a debate, not with words, but with music?" Marcus raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Go on." "We invite the governor to your next performance," Evelyn continued. "Front row seat, and you play a program that tells the story of America, all of America. The pain, the struggle, the beauty, the hope. Let the music speak for itself." Frank, initially skeptical, began to see the potential. "It's risky," he admitted, "but it could be powerful. And with the governor there, security would be tight. We might actually be safer than trying to lay low." Marcus sat at the piano, his fingers ghosting over the keys as he considered the proposal. After a long moment, he began to play softly, a melody that seamlessly blended Dixie with Lift Every Voice and Sing, the Black national anthem. As the last notes faded, he looked up, a mix of determination and hope in his eyes. "Let's do it," he said simply. The next few days were a frenzy of preparation. Evelyn worked her contacts in the press, ensuring that the invitation to Governor Wallace was widely publicized. Frank coordinated with local law enforcement and the governor's security team, walking a delicate line between ensuring safety and not ceding control. Marcus, for his part, threw himself into composing and practicing. He crafted a program that was nothing short of a musical history of America, from Native American melodies to spirituals, from Gershwin to gospel. It was to be his masterpiece, a statement not just of his own artistry, but of the complex, painful, yet ultimately hopeful story of his nation. As the day of the performance approached, tension mounted. Governor Wallace, after initially dismissing the invitation, found himself under increasing pressure to attend. Civil rights leaders rallied their supporters, promising a massive but peaceful presence outside the concert hall. White supremacist groups threatened to disrupt the performance. The morning of the concert, Governor Wallace finally announced that he would attend, framing it as an opportunity to observe firsthand the kind of provocations being unleashed in our great state. As Marcus prepared backstage, Frank approached him, his face solemn. "Whatever happens out there," he said, placing a hand on Marcus's shoulder, "I want you to know I'm proud to stand with you. You've taught me more on this tour than I learned in my whole life before." Marcus nodded, emotion welling in his eyes. "Thank you, Frank, for everything." Evelyn, notepad in hand as always, watched this exchange with a journalist's eye for detail and a friend's heart full of admiration. She knew, whatever the outcome, that this night would be the climax of her story. A story of music, of America, and of two men's journey toward understanding. As the lights dimmed and Marcus walked onto the stage, Facing an audience that included both the governor and a cross-section of a divided America, the air crackled with anticipation. This performance would be an attempt at conflict resolution on a grand scale, with the power of music pitted against centuries of prejudice and fear. Marcus took a deep breath, raised his hands to the keys, and began to play. The concert that night was more than just a performance. It was a watershed moment that would redefine the course of Marcus's tour and, in many ways, the ongoing conversation about race in America. As Marcus played, weaving together a musical tapestry that told the complex story of a nation, the atmosphere in the concert hall transformed. The initial tension, palpable when Governor Wallace had taken his seat in the front row, gradually gave way to a collective sense of awe. Marcus's fingers danced across the keys, coaxing out melodies that spoke of pain and perseverance, of struggle and hope. He moved from classical pieces to jazz, from folk songs to spirituals, each transition seamless and deeply evocative. The music seemed to bypass the audience's preconceptions and prejudices, speaking directly to their shared humanity. Halfway through the performance, something remarkable happened. As Marcus launched into a particularly moving rendition of Amazing Grace, a melody that spoke to both the black and white spiritual traditions, Governor Wallace was seen to dab at his eyes with a handkerchief. This small gesture, captured by Evelyn's ever-watchful camera, would become the iconic image of the night. It represented a turning point not just for the governor, but for many in the audience who had come with closed minds and found themselves unexpectedly moved. As the final notes faded away, the concert hall erupted in a standing ovation that seemed to last an eternity. Marcus, sweat glistening on his brow, stood and bowed, his eyes meeting those of Governor Wallace. For a moment, the two men regarded each other, the weight of history and the possibility of change hanging between them. In the days that followed, the impact of the concert reverberated across the nation. Evelyn's articles, accompanied by powerful photographs, painted a vivid picture of music's ability to bridge even the deepest divides. The image of Governor Wallace, moved to tears by Marcus's performance, became a symbol of the potential for change, even in the most hardened hearts. This concert marked a clear turning point in the tour. No longer was it just about showcasing Marcus's musical talent, it had become a powerful vehicle for social change. The remaining dates on the tour quickly sold out, with audiences now coming not just to hear beautiful music, but to be part of a movement. Frank, deeply affected by the events of the night, approached Marcus with a new proposal. "I think we need to change our approach," he said. "Instead of just concerts, what if we organized community events during the day? Workshops, discussions, bringing people together before they even step into the concert hall." Marcus, energized by the possibilities, readily agreed. "Music has opened the door," he said. "Now we need to invite people to walk through it." Evelyn, always quick to see the bigger picture, suggested involving local musicians and civil rights leaders in each city they visited. "We can create a true dialogue," she explained, "using your platform to amplify other voices." And so, the tour took on a new direction. Each stop became not just a concert, but a day-long event of community engagement and musical exchange. Marcus would often be found playing impromptu duets with local musicians, while Frank, to everyone's surprise, including his own, became a powerful speaker on his own journey from prejudice to understanding. This new approach brought its own challenges. Some promoters balked at the expanded scope, and there were still threats and protests in certain cities. But the impact was undeniable. Slowly but surely, they were changing minds and opening hearts, one note at a time. As they embarked on this new phase of their journey, Marcus, Frank, and Evelyn shared a sense of purpose and hope. They had stumbled upon a powerful truth, that music, combined with genuine dialogue and community engagement, could be a force for real change in America. As the tour entered its final weeks, Marcus, Frank, and Evelyn found themselves changed in profound and unexpected ways. The journey that had begun as a simple concert tour had become a transformative experience for each of them, forcing them to confront their own beliefs, fears, and aspirations. One evening, after a particularly moving community workshop and concert in Atlanta, the three of them sat in Marcus's hotel room, sharing a quiet moment of reflection. Marcus, his fingers absently tracing melodies on the arm of his chair, spoke first. "You know," he said, his voice soft with wonder, "when I started this tour, I thought music was my gift to the world. But now I realize it's the world's gift to me. Every person we've met, every story we've heard, it's all become part of the music." Frank nodded, his usually stern face softened by emotion. "I never thought I'd say this, but this tour has been the most important thing I've ever done. More than my time in the Marines, more than any job I've ever had." He paused, struggling to find the right words. "I came into this thinking I was protecting you, Marcus. But in reality, you've protected me from my own ignorance." Evelyn, who had been scribbling notes as always, looked up from her notepad. "You've both come so far," she said. "When I started documenting this tour, I thought I was going to write about music and racism in America. Instead, I found myself writing about transformation and hope." As they continued to talk, each of them reflected on their personal growth. Marcus spoke of how the tour had deepened his understanding of his art. He had always known that music had power, but seeing its ability to change hearts and minds firsthand had given him a new sense of purpose. He was no longer content to simply be a great pianist. He wanted to use his music as a force for change in the world. Frank's transformation was perhaps the most dramatic. He had started the tour as a man locked into a narrow worldview, his prejudices armor against a world he didn't fully understand. Now he found himself not just tolerant, but actively advocating for equality and understanding. He spoke of the shame he felt for his past beliefs, but also of the liberation that came with embracing a more open and compassionate worldview. Evelyn reflected on how the tour had changed her as a journalist and as a person. She had started out seeking a story, but had found herself becoming part of one. Her articles had evolved from simple reporting to powerful calls for social change, and she found herself grappling with the responsibility that came with her growing influence. As the night wore on, their conversation turned to the future. The tour was nearing its end, but all three of them knew that their journey was far from over. "What comes next?" Frank asked, voicing the question on all of their minds. Marcus smiled, a mix of determination and hope in his eyes. "We keep playing," he said simply. "The music doesn't stop just because the tour does. We've started something here, something important. Now we have to see it through." Evelyn nodded, already envisioning the stories yet to be told. "And we keep sharing these stories," she added. "The world needs to hear them." As they sat there, three unlikely friends brought together by circumstance and transformed by shared experience, they felt a sense of both accomplishment and anticipation. They had grown, individually and together, in ways they never could have imagined. And they knew that this growth, this journey toward understanding and change, was not just their own, it was America's journey too. As Marcus took the stage for the final concert of the tour, the atmosphere was electric with emotion and anticipation. The journey that had begun months ago in New York had traversed not just the physical landscape of America, but its social and cultural terrain as well. The concert hall was packed, a testament to the impact their tour had made. In the front row sat an unlikely group. Civil rights leaders, local musicians they had met along the way, and even a few faces that had once been hostile but were now open and receptive. As Marcus began to play, the music seemed to encapsulate everything they had experienced. Each note spoke of the challenges they had faced, the connections they had made, and the changes they had undergone. The melody wove together themes of struggle and hope, of division and unity, creating a symphonic representation of America itself. Frank stood at the side of the stage, his posture still military straight, but his eyes soft with emotion. Evelyn sat in the audience, her pen flying across her notepad, capturing this final chapter of their extraordinary journey. As the last notes faded away, Marcus stood to a thunderous ovation. But instead of taking a bow, he gestured to Frank and Evelyn to join him on stage. The three of them stood there, hands clasped, facing an audience that represented the very diversity and complexity of the nation they had traversed. In that moment, the central theme of their journey was clear. Music, in its purest form, had the power to transcend boundaries, challenge prejudices, and open hearts. It was a universal language that could speak to the shared humanity in all people, paving the way for understanding and change. As they took their final bow, Marcus, Frank and Evelyn knew that while their tour was ending, their mission to bring harmony to a divided nation was just beginning.